My father texted the group, "You're disowned. Don't contact us again." He forgot I managed their retirement accounts. I complied fully, and their golden years turned tarnished overnight. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the kind of person to watch my parents' world crumble and feel nothing. But when that text came through, something fundamental shifted inside me. The group chat notification lit up my phone during a client meeting, and I made the mistake of glancing at it. 7 words that ended 3 decades of relationship. "You're disowned. Don't contact us again." Below it, my father had added, "We have no son." My mother, ever the silent supporter of his decisions, had hearted the message. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very phone he used to send that message? I paid the bill. The retirement account he'd been bragging about at last month's family dinner? I managed every dollar. The investment portfolio that was supposed to fund their cruise around the Mediterranean next spring? My financial planning made it possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The disowning came because I refused to fire my assistant. My parents had met him once at a company event, and my father spent the entire evening making comments about how I was enabling the wrong lifestyle by employing someone openly gay. When I didn't laugh at his jokes, he pulled me aside and told me I was embarrassing the family. I told him the only embarrassing thing was his bigotry. He didn't like that. The argument escalated over the following weeks. He'd called during work hours, demanding I make the change. He said it reflected poorly on our family name, that clients would think less of me. I reminded him that I'd built my financial consulting firm from nothing, that my client list had tripled in 2 years, and that my assistant was the most competent person I'd ever worked with. None of that mattered to him. The final straw came at my sister's birthday dinner. My father stood up, wine glass in hand, and announced he was cutting me out of his will unless I corrected my priorities. The table went silent. My sister looked mortified. My mother studied her plate. I stood up, placed my napkin on my chair, and left. The disowning text came 2 days later. I sat in my office that afternoon, staring at my phone. My assistant noticed something was wrong and asked if I needed anything. I told him I was fine, just processing some family stuff. He nodded and closed the door behind him, giving me space. That's when I opened my laptop and pulled up the accounts. My parents had always been terrible with money. My father worked in middle management at a manufacturing plant for 30 years, and my mother was a part-time teacher. They made decent money, but they spent it faster than it came in. New cars every 3 years. Renovating the kitchen twice. A timeshare in Florida they used once. By the time my father hit 55, they had maybe $30,000 in savings and a mortgage that wouldn't be paid off for another decade. I just finished my MBA and started my consulting firm when my father asked for help. He was panicking about retirement, worried they'd have nothing. I spent weeks analyzing their finances, restructuring their debt, and setting up investment accounts. I moved their savings into a diversified portfolio, set up automatic contributions, and monitored everything monthly. I did it for free because they were family. Over 7 years, I grew their $30,000 into nearly $800,000. I negotiated the refinancing of their mortgage. I helped them pay off their credit cards. I found tax advantages they didn't know existed. They went from facing a retirement of penny pinching and part-time work to planning luxury vacations and early retirement at 62. My father loved telling people about it. At family gatherings, he'd brag about his financial genius and how he'd set himself up so well. He never mentioned my name. When people asked who his advisor was, he'd deflect or say he'd figured it out himself. I looked at the accounts on my screen. My father had made me the primary manager 7 years ago, with full control over all transactions. He'd never changed it. The account interface showed me everything: their checking, savings, investment portfolios, retirement accounts, even the emergency fund I'd insisted they maintain. I created a new document and started typing. First, I drafted a formal letter of resignation as their financial advisor. I kept it professional, noting that due to personal circumstances, I could no longer provide services. I included a list of recommended advisors in their area and wished them well. I scheduled it to send via certified mail the next morning. Then I started the process of removing myself from their accounts. As the primary manager, I could do this unilaterally. I transferred all control back to them, disabled automatic investments, and removed my access. The whole process took about 40 minutes. But I didn't stop there. My father had been planning to retire in 4 months. He'd already submitted his notice at work. They'd booked a 3-week European vacation for the fall, and put a deposit on a condo in a retirement community. All of this was funded by the assumption that they had $800,000 in liquid, accessible assets. What they didn't understand was how those assets were structured. I'd put most of their money in retirement accounts with significant tax advantages, but with a catch. Early withdrawals before they turned 59 and a half came with massive penalties. My father was 61, so he was clear. But the accounts were structured to pay out in a specific way, with careful timing to minimize tax burden over the next 30 years. I'd also invested heavily in long-term positions that would mature over the next decade. Selling them now would mean capital gains taxes and losses from exiting positions before they peaked. I'd explained all of this to them multiple times, showing them projections and timelines. My father always nodded along, saying he trusted me to handle it. What they had in immediately accessible cash was about $60,000. Everything else required strategic withdrawal, tax planning, and patience. I drafted a second document outlining exactly where every dollar was and what accessing it would mean. I included tax implications, penalty calculations, and projected losses from premature position exits. I estimated that if they tried to liquidate everything immediately, they'd walk away with maybe $500,000 after taxes and penalties. Still a decent amount, but not the $800,000 they thought they had. I scheduled that document to arrive the same day as my resignation letter. The next morning, I disabled all the automatic alerts and notifications I'd set up for their accounts. For years, I'd monitored everything, catching fraudulent charges, optimizing interest rates, rebalancing portfolios quarterly. Now they'd be on their own. I also removed them from my firm's client portal, where I'd been providing complimentary market analysis and financial planning updates. The premium service I'd been giving them for free was worth about $10,000 a year. They'd never asked how much it cost because they'd never had to pay for it. My assistant asked if I wanted him to handle the certified mail. I told him I'd do it myself. I drove to the post office, paid for tracking and signature confirmation, and sent both letters. Then I went back to the office and focused on my actual paying clients. The call came 3 days later. My father's number flashed on my phone. I declined it. He called again. Declined. Then my mother called. Declined. Then my sister. I answered my sister's call. She was frantic, asking what I'd done. Our parents had received my letters, and my father was losing his mind. He tried to log into the accounts and found himself locked out. He'd called the brokerage and discovered he was now the primary account holder, but all the automatic investments were turned off, and he didn't understand what any of it meant. I asked her if she'd seen the group chat message. She said yes, but that I was being petty. I told her that I was complying with his request not to contact them. Managing their money required contact. Since I was disowned, I could no longer ethically maintain control of their finances. She said I was destroying their retirement over a stupid argument. I asked her if she remembered why they disowned me. She went quiet. Then she said that I could have just handled it privately instead of making a scene. I told her that I had handled it privately. I'd removed myself from their accounts, provided them with all the information they needed, and recommended other advisors. If they were having trouble understanding their own finances, that wasn't my problem anymore. Then I hung up. Update 1. My father showed up at my office 2 weeks later. My assistant tried to stop him, but he pushed past and burst into my office during a client call. I muted my microphone and told him to leave. He refused. He stood there, red-faced and shaking, demanding I fix what I'd done. He said I'd sabotaged their retirement, that the money was gone, that they couldn't afford to retire now. I asked him if he'd read the document I'd sent. He said he didn't understand any of it, that it was full of jargon and numbers. I told him that was exactly my point. For 7 years, I'd handled everything because he didn't want to learn. He'd been happy to take credit for the results while remaining ignorant of the process. Now he had to face the consequences of that choice. He said I was being cruel, that they were my parents and I owed them. I reminded him that he'd disowned me. That I had no son meant he had no financial advisor. He started yelling, and my assistant called building security. As they escorted him out, he shouted that I'd regret this, that family was forever, that I couldn't just walk away. I returned to my client call and apologized for the interruption. Over the following month, I heard through my sister that things were falling apart. My father had met with 2 of the advisors I'd recommended, but both wanted fees he considered outrageous. He didn't understand that I'd been providing premium services for free for 7 years. He thought basic financial advice was supposed to be complimentary. He'd tried to manage the accounts himself and made several mistakes. He'd sold positions at a loss, triggered unnecessary capital gains taxes, and failed to rebalance the portfolio properly. The brokerage had called him multiple times about suspicious activity, worried that his account had been compromised. My mother had started picking up part-time work again. The retirement community had called about their deposit, asking when they'd be moving in. My father had to tell them they were delaying indefinitely. The condo was sold to another buyer within a week. My sister called and begged me to help them. She said my father was too proud to apologize, but she knew he regretted it. I asked her if he'd actually said that. She admitted he hadn't, but she was sure he felt it. I told her that feelings didn't pay retirement bills. If he wanted help, he knew where to find me. But it would start with an actual apology and acknowledgement of what he'd done. She said I was being unreasonable. I hung up. Update 2. 3 months after I'd removed myself from their accounts, my mother called from my father's phone. She was crying, asking me to please reconsider. They'd lost over $100,000 in value because my father didn't know what he was doing. They couldn't afford the European trip. They couldn't afford to retire at all now. I asked her if she'd hearted that message in the group chat. She went silent. Then she said she'd done it to support my father, that she didn't really mean it. I told her that actions had consequences, that she'd chosen her side. She said I was punishing her for staying loyal to her husband. I told her she'd punished me for staying loyal to my principles. Then I asked her what she wanted from me. She said they needed help. Just a little guidance, just enough to get back on track. I told her I charged $200 an hour for consultations now, with a 10-hour minimum retainer. She gasped and said that was highway robbery. I explained that was my standard rate for non-clients, and since I'd been disowned, they were definitively non-family and therefore non-clients. She hung up. I wasn't completely heartless. I monitored their accounts from a distance through industry contacts. I'd set up alerts with their brokerage, not tied to my name, just to ensure they didn't completely destroy everything. When I saw my father about to make a catastrophically stupid move, I had an anonymous tip sent to their brokerage's fraud department. It delayed the transaction long enough for someone there to call him and explain why it was a terrible idea. But I wasn't going to swoop in and save them. They'd made their choice. I'd made mine. Update 3. 6 months after the disowning text, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter from my father. It was 3 pages long. He apologized for the text, for the public disowning, for not valuing what I'd done for them. He said he'd been wrong about my assistant, that his prejudice had cost him his son. He asked if we could meet, just to talk, no expectations. I read it twice. Then I put it in my desk drawer. 2 weeks later, I responded. I agreed to meet for coffee, neutral location, just the two of us. He arrived 15 minutes early, looking older than I remembered. We sat across from each other, and he asked how I'd been. I told him I'd been fine. Business was good. Life was stable. He nodded and said he deserved that. Then he asked what it would take for me to forgive him. I told him forgiveness wasn't something he could earn with words. It required change, time, and proof. I asked him if he'd had any contact with my assistant since the disowning. He admitted he hadn't. I asked him if he'd examined why he'd been so bothered by someone else's existence. He said he'd been thinking about it a lot. I told him that was a start. We met 3 more times over the next month. Slow conversations, careful words. He asked about my life, and I gave him surface-level answers. He told me about their struggles with retirement, and I listened without offering solutions. On the 4th meeting, he asked if I'd consider helping them again. Not for free, he clarified. He understood that ship had sailed, but maybe at a family rate, whatever I thought was fair. I told him I'd think about it. A week later, I sent him a contract. Standard advisory agreement, modified for family circumstances. My normal rate was $200 per hour. For them, I'd do $150. Quarterly portfolio reviews, annual tax planning, and emergency consultations as needed. Minimum commitment of 1 year, after which we'd reassess. He signed it. My mother signed it. They paid the retainer. I took them back on as clients, but with boundaries. I wasn't their son doing them a favor anymore. I was a professional they'd hired. Our meetings were scheduled, documented, and billed. When my father tried to call me at 9 p.m. with a non-urgent question, I let it go to voicemail and returned it during business hours. It took another 6 months to repair most of the damage my father had done to their accounts. They'd lost about 2 years of growth, which at their age was significant. I restructured what was left, adjusted their retirement timeline, and told them honestly that they'd need to work another 18 months to compensate for the losses. My father accepted it without complaint. Things are different now. My parents and I have a relationship, but it's not what it was. Maybe it never will be. They see me every few weeks, usually for portfolio reviews that sometimes turn into dinners. My father has apologized to my assistant in person. My mother has tried to make amends by being more present, more thoughtful. But I haven't forgotten that text message. I haven't forgotten being disowned in a group chat, publicly humiliated for standing up for someone's dignity. I haven't forgotten my mother hearting that message, choosing loyalty to prejudice over loyalty to her son. They have their retirement back, diminished but functional. They'll still travel, though not as extravagantly. They'll still retire, though later than planned. They've learned that financial security isn't magic. It's work, expertise, and careful planning. And they've learned that family isn't unconditional. It's a choice you make every day, with every action. They chose to disown me. I chose to comply. When they wanted to undo that choice, it came with a price. Some people think I'm vindictive, that I should have been the bigger person, that I should have helped them regardless. But I spent 7 years building their future for free, out of love and obligation. When they threw that away over bigotry, they taught me something valuable. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. My father texted the group, "You're disowned, don't contact us again." He forgot I managed their retirement accounts. I complied fully, and their golden years turned tarnished overnight. They got them back, eventually, but not the same way they lost them. This time, they had to pay for it. And honestly, that feels fair. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.